Hi, Andrew. Hey, congratulations on your new film, Lost on a Mountain in Maine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know what? This is a fascinating story. I never heard of this story before. So first of all, tell us what drew you that you wanted to direct this film.
Well, first off, what you just said, I'd never heard this story before. It's like this little piece. I read the screenplay, and it's like this little piece of American history that, you know, was lost. And what drew me to it was, I think the fact that we haven't seen a movie like this in a long time. They used to make movies like this all the time, like White Fang, Old Yeller, The Black Stallion, Empire of the Sun. And so that felt like a throwback to me. And it also the fact that Stallone is involved felt like, okay, like this could actually get seen by people. So what drew me in ultimately was the wilderness aspect of the movie. I've made a few features, they've all been wilderness based. I also grew up in South Dakota and Madagascar, very wilderness oriented places. And so that's just something I feel like nature feels my creativity. It also feels humanity in a way. So that appealed to me. And then also I think from just a audience perspective, the parent-child dynamic of the movie is ultimately what made me say I got to do this because I I lost my mother when I was 20, and I bonded with my father because of that. And I think the parent-child relationship, your family, is the most important thing in the world. And this is a movie that kind of hammers that home. And so that's why I felt like I had to make this. It's a very simple idea, but I think people need to hear it more often.
I mean, what was your approach into this film? Because it almost seems like it's two different type of storylines that go running parallel. Because you have the family storyline, and then you have the survival storyline.
hmm
So how did you want to approach this and tie it all together?
What's interesting is that the book that was written after the true event happened is only from the perspective of the boy in the wilderness. But what we had as filmmakers and as the screenwriter also had was a trove of archival footage that were interviews with searchers from that era, and also Don Fendler's brother and the mother and a lot of people. So we had this other story to tell as well. And I think survival stories, I feel we see them all the time, right? Every year there's like some sort of survival story, and I feel like we've seen some of the definitive ones with The Revenant, and I thought what was intriguing about this was the cross-cutting between the parent and the child, and making a film about that gulf, about what actually drives us, the why behind survival. Sure, we can see somebody survive, but what's the why behind it? And in this particular case, it's family. That's why. That's why you keep going. So that's ultimately what appealed to me. And when people see the movie, they'll notice like a lot of what you see with the family as they're trying to find him and as they're mounting this giant search effort, which still historically I think is one of the largest in the country to this day. Um, all of that is true. Most of what you see in the movie is absolutely true, and it's because we had all that archival interview footage to pull from.
So when was the opportune time to put in these interviews as your story progresses?
So you've seen the movie.
I did.
Okay, so you know this part. Some people haven't seen it yet, so yeah, that was we knew we had that stuff there, and it was used to inform the writing of the screenplay, but we didn't actually incorporate it into the edit of the film until post-production. And I think the reason we did that was because we wanted something to ground the film and for people to remember, oh, this actually happened. And one of my favorite movies is Reds,
Hmm.
and Warren Beatty's Reds, and he does that in that movie. So I figured, you know, he can do it. Why can't I? So while the editor was cutting the film, I was behind him on my laptop, going through all that footage. Which also had one of our producers, Derek Desmond, had also done the job of laying all the footage out. And transcribing everything. So I was able to easily go in and just find the right pieces. And what I decided to do was employ that archival footage as almost chapter headings in the movie. There's a trend right now in cinema where chapter headings are like back in form. I don't know if you've noticed that. So like, how can I play with that, but we'll put a spin on it as opposed to just titles? It's people guiding the audience along, and they're not just telling you information you've seen already, but they're kind of expanding on what's happening. And
Now,
I think it works. Yeah, I think I love it.
I did it for when I first initially watched, I thought it was a documentary. Then I realized it was a narrative film.
But that is the problem with opening with that. But I think, we live in an attention span era, but this movie is made for people that will go to the movie theater and sit down and let the movie wash over them. And if they're willing to do that, those final 10 minutes are cathartic and all that stuff comes together, I think, in a really wonderful blend.
Excellent. Now you must have searched high and low to for some young teenager to play Don in this film. Tell us how you ended up settling with Luke David Blum.
Oh, number one, two great casting directors, Richard Hicks and Leslie Wasserman, and I gave them a very simple mandate, which was to find Christian Bale from Empire of the Sun. I knew that for this movie to work, we needed a very grounded, real performer. This couldn't be a Disney performer. And so they auditioned about 150 boys, and they narrowed it down to the creme de la creme for me to look at. And Luke kind of just bubbled up to the top immediately. I could see I was looking for somebody that could carry a film without words, because that was ultimately what this was going to be. And I mean, look, to me, it's a tour de force performance. Like he shows up, and what's really fascinating is you see him grow up on screen in a way, both as a character, but also that kind of happened during the shooting of the film as well, because he was 12. He was about the same age as the kid in real life when he was lost. And you could see Luke going from boy to young adult as we were shooting the movie. I think that's what happens in the film.
I'm actually astonished because there's one thing that a 12-year-old Don went through, alone on that mountain. But there's another thing to bring in another 12-year-old to play Don, to get into that mental state. How do you direct a child, through this entire process and prepare him in that position of survival mode and having him getting down and dirty?
Well, they always say 90% of directing is casting. So that would be my superficial answer, is that I just found the right kid. But when you're right, though, when you're on the ground on set, like my job as a director is to just keep the tone and keep him on the straight and narrow. I'm supposed to protect him. I'm supposed to make him look good. And so, every day it's amazing to watch somebody who is just a kid. He's a 12-year-old, right? So he's a kid and he's bouncing all over the place and he's talking and everything, to the crew and whatnot. But when you yelled action, he would just and become this little subtle ball. And he just took it seriously. And I think part of that, to give myself some credit, I took it seriously. I took every day coming to set very seriously. I believe in, as the director, you need to be the hardest worker. You need to be able to do the things that other people won't do. And you need to set an example. And I think he saw that I came to play, so he came to play as well. And I mean, in those latter scenes in the film when he's mostly emoting without dialogue, and he's on the verge of death, for lack of a better word. He was like a little Daniel Day-Lewis. Before setups, he would wear a robe. He had his like little robe, and he'd be playing adagio for strings in his AirPods, and just like sitting there not talking to anybody, almost like going full method.
Hmm.
Always respectful to the crew, but took it really seriously, and I think that reflects in the performance. It really does. It just reflects in the performance. But as a director, I just let him do his thing. I could tell that he had what it take, that he had the ability, and I just sort of got out of his way and let him do his thing and only asked for adjustments if I felt that there wasn't truth to what he was doing. But I honestly, like, he was so good that I cut dialogue on set as we were shooting. Like, you don't need to say this. Just 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 be, because I think you're fascinating to watch. And I think that translates in the film. Like, you just care about him, right?
That is so true. And when your process of filming, obviously, these films are filmed out of order, but did you film like one as wilderness type of filming and then another with the family throughout? Of course, I highly
Yeah,
doubt.
oddly, and no, it's funny because you're actually correct in the sense that, this movie, because we needed to shoot the parents out and like all the other stuff first, once we filmed all the family stuff, all those actors left, and all that was left was Luke, David Bloom, and the crew. And so he did become isolated in a way on purpose, and he had a great time. This was like summer camp for him. But yes, we shot most of the wilderness stuff alone, and all the other actors left, and it was just him, and he was sort of the king of the castle. But I think sometimes he also felt he was the only kid too, so he was isolated, and that wasn't by design. That was mostly just our schedule. Um, and I'll say again to kind of trumpet his skills. There was a day where we shot almost 50 setups. You know those little like interstitial moments in the movie where he's journeying? Like you like that's actually hard stuff to do because you have to make that can easily be forgotten when you're shooting a movie.
Mm.
But so we had this like shot list of like we got to get all this stuff so we can track his journey emotionally and his decay and everything. And that kid was careening between different makeup setups, different costume setups, and different emotional states back and forth within maybe a 3 hours in a day, and then that full 7 hour workday. Like, it was pretty amazing to watch. And my job was just to be there and ask him, okay, where did you just come from? Okay, and where are you going? And just sort of get him into that place. And we looked out for each other. It was a pretty special collaboration.
Yes, we could definitely could see that on the screen. Now let's talk about the character that, that's technically, without dialogue. It's the wilderness itself. And I know there's no way you filmed this at the Catadina mountain that Don actually got lost. So tell us the alternative location that you
Uh,
yeah.
well, you'll be surprised to know that we actually did film some stuff on top of that mountain, but I'll get to that in a second. So yeah, most of the movie is shot in upstate New York, where we did a lot of wilderness shooting there. The boring answer is because of tax incentives, but we did a lot of shooting there for the crew base and everything. We also built to the mountain on a stage. So our brilliant production designer Darcy Scanlon built an 80-foot by 80-foot replica of the peak of the mountain, which then she with our cinematographer they figured out like how are we going to make this look real and practical. We wanted to lean into practical as opposed to CGI. And we got giant fans and sprinkler systems and fog and just pummeled these poor children with all this stuff. They had a great time, but with all this stuff. But at the same time, we went to Maine, me and a small unit of people, and we hiked the mountain. And that mountain is known as the hardest non-technical hike in America, like day hike in America. And it is straight up for a mile. There are no switchbacks. And I hiked it for my interview for this movie. Like that was part of my job interview was hiking the mountain. And I made it to the top, got the job. But then to cap it off, then we went up and I had an Ari Alexa, like a 60 pounds of camera equipment in a backpack, went to the top during a storm because we needed storm footage, like bad weather, to film like visual effects plates and just film the stuff. So what you see in the film is a cross-cutting between stage and the real mountain itself. And also aerial footage that we shot from a helicopter. But yeah, so it was yeah, so we did everything in a way. It's all practical effects which we leaned on, but then also the real deal.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. I mean that I guess
Thank you.
as a director, I guess this helps you put in the yourself into Don's shoes up there on that mountain in his own way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, part of my job interview, as I said, not only was hiking the mountain, but bushwhacking through the real woods where he it wasn't part of my job interview, but I was just blessed to have that experience, right, where they took me up there and I got to see like where he was lost and where he was actually found ultimately. And so having all that in my head allowed me when we were in upstate New York to find locations that fit the vibe. But then again, when we were in Maine, we got a lot of footage that allowed us to make it feel like it was Maine. And then, a lot of Maine audiences have seen this movie already and they love it. So nobody's complaining about having a little New York in there.
Most excellent. Well, let me wrap it up with one more thing because obviously, Sylvester Stallone is tied as a producer on this. Could you tell us about his involvement into this? Because I want to say just the story alone, this is up his alley because of the theme of overcoming adversity.
Yes. I mean, he's Rocky, right? Underdog stories are like his thing, it's his brand. And yeah, he had never made an underdog story about a kid before. So that was what appealed to him about this movie, and ultimately his involvement, other than his name's on the poster, and it's selling. My goal as a director was, oh, how can I bring his brand of you know, fighting against adversity to another generation, essentially. Those who may not discover Rocky, but they can see this and that might lead them to Rocky, for example. Yeah, and as a creative collaborator, he was supportive and very hands off in a good way. Just let us be creative, let us do our thing. I think you can, yeah, I think you would agree with this. Like the movie takes creative swings here and there that I think a lot of movies probably wouldn't get away with. And I think it's during the end of the movie, it becomes pretty artful. I mean, there's like Tarkovsky references in this movie. And so they allowed me to be creative and to say things without words, whereas I think a lot of directors would not get that benefit. And again, like Rocky's an art film, in my opinion, right? And it's a very broad audience appealing movie, but it's still just a character study. And that's what we try to do here is make something that will make you cry when you leave the theater, but it's also got cinema in it.
Well said. It does certainly has that emotion and cinema all combined in one. So, Andrew,
Thank you.
thank you very much for speaking to us about Lost on a Mountain.
Yeah,
And it is
this was a pleasure. Thank you.
it's a fascinating story. Everyone needs to check it out. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.